Let's see. Oh, yeah, looks like we've got some form of audio. Let me just do a afternoon. So, what I thought I'd do today, I'm going to go through what was my legal and moral talk that I used to give for people. Whenever you're doing a mountain training course, you will have a, a similar talk to this to kind of give you some background. It's often assessed through a home paper. It's where you might be asked about, you know, various things that will help you to highlight these things. But before we go into that, I just wanted to go through a few other things. So this one and a lot of my things can be used for climbers or instructors, but a lot of it I would say is stuff that would help your ongoing development as an instructor, would be wherever you are. And so I just thought I'd share some CPD stuff that I think's interesting and really relevant to everyone. So Mountain Training are doing this Women in Mountain Training winter webinar series. So I think if they're £10 if you are a non-member of like the Mountain Training Association or the Association of Mountaineering Instructors, and they are £5 if you are a member. So basically, they've got a variety of things. They've got progressing into higher levels of mountain training qualifications. It's being run by Kath James, absolute beast of an instructor. Does winter, summer, yeah, just quite an inspirational woman. Be really interesting. There's a doctor talking about understanding the menstrual cycles. There's one on the mountain leadership model, which is being done by a doctor. The same doctor that's doing the menstrual cycle is doing another one on the perimenopause and menopause. And then I think who is it? Esther Foster, again another incredible female instructor giving talks on knowing when you're ready for various walking or climbing assessments. So these are open to people of all genders. They aren't just for women. And so from my background is when I used to work at Bass, I had to give intro talks to anybody from builders, quite a lot of builders. So there was like about 50 builders would turn up each season I was down there, as well as obviously all the science and logistics support team. And I would have to give this talk about sort of like menstrual issues and, you know, how we can try and be better towards women. And I think it made me aware of the things I wasn't aware of. And so I'm going to try and sign up for all of these, mainly because I think it's great to find out what me as a, you know, white male instructor, you know, with all my white male privilege, um, what I can do to be better at my job for for this group. So that's the first one. The other one is this Tom Fury Memorial Festival, which is in October this year. Tom was an instructor who sadly died out in the hills. He was out soloing a route and fell. And they've set up a memorial trust, and it does these things, and it's aimed at kind of not only helping people get foot in the outdoors in terms of like upping their own skills to do it safely. It's about them offering CPD opportunities. I have literally just sent them an email. I only just saw this the other day, and I was like, actually, I would quite like to be involved in that, because that's kind of what I'm trying to do here is do this. I think if I click on this one, yeah, the other one that's you know, for people that are maybe, if you're young, I think this is, I forgot, 18 to 30, the Jonathan Cornville Memorial Trust. It's been going for a long time. It offers group courses in subsidized courses in winter mountaineering and alpine climbing for young people to kind of master the skills that come with that. But what we're going to do today is look at, he says, I've got to find where everything is now. Let's see if I do that. There we go. Is to look at this legal and moral aspects. So often we look at kind of incidents that have affected mountaineering and outdoor sports. And one of the first and most notable was this Kendall disaster in the 70s. A teacher and an instructor headed into a remote plateau in the Cairngorms, and there used to be a hut there, a whiteout, and they became lost. So they dug into basic snow shelters, but by the morning, because of the conditions, there were 7 kids, I think, had died. Really tragic was they were within like 200 meters of where they were trying to get to. The result of this was that it didn't change much, because in the 70s, the litigation culture wasn't necessarily there, but it did kind of encourage a better use of qualified instructors and the use of risk assessments. There were undoubtedly more of these incidents, but probably one of the most notable for the industry was the 1995 Lyme Bay disaster, where a small group of students went out on the sea, and by the afternoon, 5 of them were dead. And it's a question of what went wrong. And so for this story, I use this idea of like a slot machine, and if you get 5 lemons, you don't hit the jackpot, you hit critical mass, and what could be minor things become a major thing. And so in terms of this, the instructors were unqualified and poorly trained. I believe they didn't know how to perform an X-rescue, which is how you can rescue somebody who's capsized and empty their boat and get them back in the boat. The boats didn't have enough buoyancy, which again helps you doing this X-rescue. The group, despite being out on the sea, didn't have sprayed X, so the boats would fill up with water and become progressively more unbalanced. The centre had no procedure for what would happen if people were overdue. And as a result, the centre manager didn't report them missing for over 4 hours. Now, there are other lemons in the rescue scenario, in the helicopter came into scene and was searching a pattern, and then there was a call for it to go somewhere else. And they probably would have found the people if they kept on their original pattern. But for some reason, they were retasked. The helicopter was retasked elsewhere. And then there was a few. I mean, even more tragic was when the winchman got to some of the people, this single stropped the person, so it was literally a strop underneath the shoulders. And as they pulled them out, like, the blood pressure dropped, and a lot of them were unconscious and sadly on their way out by the time they got to the helicopter. And one of the things that the helicopters now do is they tend to, if they're lifting people out of the water, they double strop them, so they have one under the armpit and one under the leg. Again, this is, I remember seeing this in a documentary years ago, and I can remember chatting to members of the RAF when they were flying the Sea King. And so, as you can see, there were quite a few little things that added up to mean that, if you have one thing go wrong, another thing and another thing, and it just starts to kind of, everything escalates. And so what we ended up with, so the idea of that lemons is that, you can make an isolated bad judgment, but if you keep on, going down that route, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Another kind of lesson that I often talk about was when I was on the rescue team. We rescued a college group of Cribgoch. I think one had a open laceration to their thigh and a suspected broken leg. It was Yeah, it was a difficult rescue, but to give you an idea of what I believe the lemons were in this incident from a perspective of just being involved, was the weather that day was utterly appalling. It was, it wasn't super strong winds, but it was really strong rain. The group had driven up that night, got here late, so they weren't well rested. The group itself hadn't really done that much mountain climbing. They were from somewhere in the south of the UK. The leaders, I don't know how long they were qualified, but arguably they hadn't done the route before. It's, I think, let me just see. Oh, yeah. This is uh, just an image of. So this is Crib Goch. You come along, you kind of come up here, and this is like a normal grade one scramble up, and then you have to walk along this precipitous edge. This bit in the shade is very steep, and on my time in the rescue team, if you went that side, you're almost certainly not going to live. And then it's hard to make out, but you can see the path comes up here. You sort of come up into this bay, and actually what you have to do is go up, and you're forced to do a scramble up some precipitous ledges from a coal about here. And from what I remember, we rescued the people from here. So they were technically not on the route. So my thought was that actually maybe the person with a mountain leader qualification, which is arguably not the qualification to take people scrambling. I know people do, but you would have to be. Yeah, it's difficult. The wording I think in the mountain leader qualification is steep ground, and I don't think it really mentions grade one terrain. Grade one terrain is really sort of for the MCI. There's a lot of, from my perspective as an MCI, where I take people scrambling all the time, I take people rock climbing. I'm far happier taking people rock climbing or on grade 2 or 3 scrambles, because as soon as I take them on a grade 2 or 3 scramble, I have them on a rope. Probably some of the scariest and most difficult judgment calls are when I'm taking people on grade 1 terrain, because often we're not got them on a rope, and so there are judgments need to be made. And so, in this situation of what I just talked about with Crib Goch, is that these people, the instructor has made, if you chosen a different route on that day because of the weather and your inexperience, if you haven't chosen a scramble, and it often, you look at the heuristic side of, like, they've only got this couple of days up here for a weekend to achieve what they want. And you have to ask yourself sometimes, is you might want to be doing a certain route, but is it really suitable for the people that you're working with? And so often we have to work on the principle that we've got to, what we're doing is for the people we're instructing, not for us. So the 1995 Lyme Bay tragedy resulted in the Young Person Safety Act that first created ALA, which is now ALA, which is the Adventurous Activities Licensing Service. And they hand out licenses to centres or individual that meet the criteria. And it's kind of part of the HSE. And what they do is there's certain activities that are covered under that you need a license for, and there's certain ones that aren't. So one of the other things that came out of this was the managing director was the first person to be successfully trialled under the corporate manslaughter charges, because it was felt that as the CEO of this organization, or the managing director, it was his responsibility to ensure that risk assessments and properly qualified staff proper equipment were supplied. And, as a result, we now, if you're taking children, people under the age of 18 on certain activities, then you need to have a ALA license if it's a paid thing. If it's voluntary, it's different. So another instance was a 12-year-old boy with a scout group on Snowdon. They were walking down, and obviously quite a big group. And as they walked down, this child kind of got separated from the group and has tried to make his own way down, and he's fallen to his death. The leader was taken to court for involuntary manslaughter. The judge found him innocent, mainly because the judge felt that as he was operating as a volunteer, he didn't want to put people, if he'd found that person guilty, that possibly would have totally changed people volunteering, because, how that, works. The scouting movement did change its policies to have, suitable people lead groups in the mountain, and now at least you need your ML, and there's certain processes that they set up. What's really interesting here is we're going to come to a more modern and contemporary issue where actually, despite the scouting movement changing its policies, there have been issues in its implementation, which again has had tragic consequences. Another incident was a caving death where, they had an LEA centre, ALA license with a group of 10 people. As they were coming out, the cave started to flood. A bit like this cat scout on Snowdon, one person was left behind and has tragically died. There was a pool jumping death. The centre had gorge walking on its list of ALA activities, in which some pool jumping exists. Over time, those jumps were increased and got bigger and bigger. The centre didn't have an independent technical expert. So this is a lot of centres, they are advised to have an independent person. So somebody like myself might come along and I might be the technical advisor for mountaineering and rock climbing and scrambling. I wouldn't necessarily be the person for paddle sports or caving. Despite one member of SURF raising concerns after a near miss on this jump with one of the actual staff, nothing happened. And then eventually a 12-year-old went to do this jump, and they, from what I understand, that it was it was near vertical, but you had to clear sort of a meter or so to hit water, because if you just fell down, you were going to hit a ledge. And I think the near miss was one of the staff kind of jumped and kind of backed out and only just missed the ledge. And this is pretty much what happened in this. Now, I have worked, and I did, as a freelance instructor, and I can remember going sea level traversing with a group from a centre. And, I was just there as another member of staff helping, if there's a bit of ropey stuff or, it's not really my forte. We did some jumps, and I brought this up to the manager, like this thing, and sort of said, where you're jumping, is it really appropriate? Because again, you had to clear rock before you hit the water if you just fell straight down. And the guy pretty much dismissed me. So yeah, it's all well and good knowing about these things, but it's being willing to look at your implementation. So in this case, it was a 9-meter jump. Now, I would probably pap myself on a 9 meter jump. I've done a lot of deep water sailing, and 9 meters is a long way to jump. Now, for kids, if you get them to jump off like a meter or 2 meters or 3 meters, that's a big jump for them. And so you sometimes, one of the things we sometimes talk about is the difference between an apparent and an actual risk. Like a lot of what we try and do in outdoor educations is to make it look like they're a risk, but we've managed it and we've put in the mitigation so that it's an apparent risk and not an actual risk. And so, I would argue that getting a normal group of kids to jump off like 3 meters is going to be as exciting as they need. They don't need to like be hurling themselves off, 9 meters into the sea. So these are things that I have added to this talk. So there have been lots of incidents, and my last yesterday's little live stream was on me going through the 20 or the 30 odd accidents that the BMC had reported. I've actually just emailed the Association of British Climbing Walls to see whether they've got a bigger list of rescues or incidents at climbing walls that I could look at and do the same thing. I found it very interesting. There are a couple of things that even I hadn't looked at. So there was a few cases. One was a climbing wall was stood in an area that clearly had like yellow lines, signs that said "Do not stand here. You're in a fall zone," and somebody fell on top of them, and they became paralysed. And they went to court. And in the court, the video was shown of the incident because the centre had video recording at the time. And it showed this guy not just like accidentally walking through it. He'd stood in this area for an extended time. So again, I don't know whether he won or lost the case, but he certainly lost. He probably was seen to be responsible for his action. There was another one where somebody jammed from the top of. So it sounded like it was a top-out bouldering wall. Somebody got on top and they ran off and jumped onto the big mat, and they injured themselves. When this one went to court, the guy was like, "Yeah, you were injured. We were found. This is like a X £100,000 payout. We were actually deemed because you jumped off, which was really stupid. We're deeming you 50% responsible for this action. So the climbing wall was only liable for the other 50%. He went back and appealed. The judge then went, actually, I think he knocked it down to 25%, rather, and said, you were 75%. So in this case, there was somebody using the equipment in a way that it wasn't designed and really was just stupid to do. And then on the flip side to that, there was they had an instructed session. They'd done a little bit of climbing, a little bit of bouldering, and then after the session, they were allowed to do a free bouldering session. And during that time, they've fallen off, they've injured themselves. And in this particular case, the judge looked at their risk assessments and their guidance, and it was kind of non-existent. And in his summing up, he decided that the climbing wall in this case had shown what might be considered a laissez-faire attitude to risk management. And despite the fact that this person had been given some skills, had been told about risks and stuff, the climbing wall, because of its lack of paperwork and training of its instructors, was found liable. I've gone through the various auto belay accidents. I think yesterday there's lots of belaying accidents, and now we have like the DAV, which is the German version of the BMC, basically has an assisted braking device rule. The one thing that you can pick up from a lot of climbing wall incidents is If you are instructing, I will only ever have two ropes. I've got two hands. I can tail the dead rope as people are climbing with two people. I never go over two ropes when I'm teaching because I can't tail the ropes. And that goes, it's not just kids, that's to adults as well, because when people are learning, there is a high probability that at some point they have a little bit of what I would call a brain fart, and they just momentarily lapse and they forget to have the hand on the dead rope. So even if I've got somebody belaying and somebody backing up, I'm usually behind the person backing up, being like they could go Olé! And save the day. And unless your hand is physically on the rope, then you can't be backing them up. So yeah, that's a big take-home thing for me with climbing walls, is always have your rope, dead hand on the rope. So this is prevention of future death reports, and it's about this young child who was again a scout, and I would recommend, so I'm gonna put some links to this. These links can all be found in the Mountain Training 2024 safety report. And I don't really want to go through it, but within this report, basically, I think a few scouts broke off from their leaders in Llandudno. They walked up on the Great Orme, and as they came off, one of them has fallen down now. What they found was that despite the scouts, after the scout death in 1999, changing their procedures, there was a lack of knowledge from the leaders as to how responsible they were and what methodology. The county didn't have a district commissioner who needed to sign off on various things, and yeah, there were quite a few things where it's a shame, but I think certainly the scouts, based on this, will have to go back and see how they manage this. And, if you are going down the road of becoming an instructor, come and look at these things. They're really good resources to see what can go wrong and how they manage them. Now, one of my experiences is that, if I work for myself, I don't necessarily have very involved risk management, risk assessments and guidelines, because I work for myself and I work within a framework that I'm happy with. And most of my risk assessment is based on doing it dynamically, based on the person, the weather, where I am, what I'm doing, and what their aims are. And I've talked about this before. And so often with smaller operators, that's the thing, is like we when I'm working for myself, how much time do I want to spend writing generic risk assessments? Whereas bigger organizations are often a lot better. So like the Scouts and other big organizations would be very good at having these big risk assessment documents and guidance and method statements and stuff like that. But often they aren't well. It's hard to check that all your staff are reading them. So, I hurt my back lifting, and apparently there was a risk assessment for food moves that was, in this organization, was in a document management system that you had to know how to log into, and that's where you had to log incidents. And so sometimes big organizations have really good systems, but actually when it comes to the making sure people have read and understood and are actually obeying by them in real life, that's where they fall down. Whereas smaller businesses often have much better ongoing dynamic risk assessments, but less on the more written side, and it's let's just go. Um, there is another very recent incident where a very good old friend of mine, he used to live in Clanberis. I used to climb the slate with him. He went on and became this very, he was getting a lot of experience guiding in Skye and in Scotland where he was based, and he had two clients along the Annakeegut Ridge. They came along and they were descending the Clackaig Gully. His wife reported him overdue, and because of the weather, they didn't find him or his clients till the following day, and they'd all sadly perished. And it's a very hard one to understand because there are no survivors and there are no witnesses. I've descended down there. It's a difficult place to descend, and so yeah, it's like what? Yeah, it's a very difficult. I don't really want to go into that. There was another one where a company is, again, this is from the Crown Prosecutor Fiscal Office. It's a Scottish incident, so it's a prosecutor fiscal. Again, I'm not going to go into it that much, but there was a child like boogie boarding down a river, and I don't know the things, but again, they've died. So look at that. There is a paddleboarding instance which was down in Pembroke. Now, there is a really in-depth. This is a mountain training lessons learned thing. Again, really, really good resource to actually look into it. There's also a Marine Accident Investigation Board, very thorough. But essentially, from what I understand, is they had when you're paddleboarding on moving water. A lot of people you have like a leash, and sometimes you put that leash around your ankle if you're on like a flat, non-moving water. But it's happened before in that somebody has fallen off a paddleboard on a river, and the leash has got caught round a buoy, and so if you've got it round your ankle, you end up kind of upside down, being waterboarded, and it's quite hard to actually reach up and take it off. So I've been paddleboarding with some very experienced people on moving water, and they always make you put it or made me put it up here so that I could release it. Other places would be on certain water-based, like whitewater kayaking. They often have like a waist belt which has got a quick release on, so that if you're towing somebody, you can get out of it quickly. And there was a lot of issues with, there weren't really many. I don't think there was a SUP qualification as such, and so you kind of in that area of who's qualified. And I think British Canoeing or the BCU have kind of, because it's a paddle sport, have kind of started offering qualifications and passing on knowledge so people don't get into trouble. But again, it's this person was doing stuff that they potentially on the wrong day because the weather was really wet, so they were on a kind of estuary stroke river, so there would have been like high, much higher currents potentially. Yeah, there was a series of errors. Again, this is like the mountain safety. You just put in mountain training 2024 safety report. This is really interesting document. There's loads of stuff. It kind of talks about, just all sorts of things. There was one thing in here which was of a incident on a mountain training course. Now, from that report, the my understanding was limited. I knew of where it was. Um, I don't. I've got. They were very kind. Contacted Simon, well, John Cousins, who then put me in contact with Simon Patton, I think, who is in charge of the mountain training Cymru, and he's given me an anonymized version of their report. And so it was a damp day. They went to Bus Stop Quarry. They had to, to do this course, they have to see somebody climb VS4C. The person does it. The only routes there that are trad really of that grade are where there's like three that I might choose. One is an E1, so kind of a bit, you definitely wouldn't do it on a damp day. One is Solstice, which is HVS, got a very difficult start now, maybe even harder than HVS now. I think I might put it at E1 in my guidebook. And then Equinox. Now, what's quite interesting, if we no. Right, is that on the browser? Yeah, so if we go into here, this is my description. So start below the line of weakness, at least only up left across the wall. Climb this easily with very little in the way of obvious gear until near the top. Now, I've climbed it quite a lot. I can get gear in. I'm quite happy with it. You have to deal with a little bit of like extending runners so that you straighten it out unless you're using two ropes. There is, in the thing they talk about, can be well protected with a set of micro wires, though some do have a tendency to be dragged out of their placement by the movement of the rope. And so when this person has fallen, all of their gear has come down. And one of the issues that it talks about is, actually logbook experience of, how we assess people. Now, it was a question that was one of the, I think I get it all the time. So in this instruction mentoring, so there's this, I've just done this thing here, which is rescue scenario. So the idea is if you know how to do a set piece rescue, it's about how do you work that into critically think your way through a scenario rather than just let's perform a snatch rescue, let's perform this. But the other one was how do you assess students be ready to lead? And it's one of the things that has come from the mountain training looking into this is, how do you look into it? And so often all we have is their logbook to go on, and actually you have to look really detailed into that. And one of the things was that actually somebody who has only climbed on single pitch crags could potentially have gone through their entire climbing career and never weighted a belay in anger. Whereas if you're going multi-pitch climbing and you go up to a ledge and it's only a small ledge, there are times when you will have weighted your belay. And so as soon as you're weighting gear, you kind of want to it has to be good, otherwise it will fall out. There is a lot more to that, and I don't really want to cover it, but this is that report, the 2024 report. Very interesting reading. This is the major investigation, impartial, bullshit, transparent, and ethical investigation. And I didn't, because I've been away, I didn't know about it. I literally just emailed them and asked, and within well, a couple of days, they got back to me with uh, a lot more information. Again, don't really want to share too much about it because I think it's, if you want that information, please contact them and get it for yourself. Uh, and then these are the ones that they're kind of are external to, so they weren't based on like mountain training things, but the Explorer Scouts in Llandudno, Haverford paddleboarding, the River Tay. And so it's got links to all of these things, and then this ongoing thing. And then there's also another thing which is learning through loss, and it's just another kind of resource really for you to find out more about risk management and how you can, ensure and participants understand the risk and stuff like that. It's in research, we would call it informed consent. Like if you're getting somebody to sign off in a bit of research, you have to have informed them with what they need to know to do it. And sometimes within big organizations, it's probably harder to do that. Whereas when I'm working for myself, I'm usually the person responding to the inquiry emails. I have long conversations via email, via the phone, before we come up with a plan. And so, yeah, it's interesting. Where are we? Is that one? No, that one. Cool. Let's go back to this. And so kind of getting back to the legal side of things is that as instructors or coaches in the outdoors or doing anything, in fact, everybody has a duty of care to everyone else. It's often described as that with the neighbor test, which is that any of my actions or inactions can cause harm. And it's really interesting, actions or inactions. So you could do, if you do something or you don't do something. And so with being qualified and offering people a guidance, instruction, just taking them out, we are kind of saying that we have enough skills that we can offer I don't think legally it's deemed an enhanced duty of care, but due to our level of expertise, we would be deemed as more responsible than somebody without. And so duty of care we owe to everybody, and that's not just your clients, that's potentially everybody else at the crag. So if you've seen A Few Good Men, there's this bit where it's like unit, core, God, country. And we are responsible to ourselves, to our group, to the centre or our employer, the organisation where the group might be from, other outdoor users, and arguably the outdoor industry as a whole. So what we're trying to do is manage risks and look after people in a way where we're not going to be deemed as what is often seen as negligence. That level of care that we have to offer changes with age. So children are seen as having little to no responsibilities for their actions. Under 6, they do not have any responsibilities. And from there's a sliding scale, literally to the day somebody turns 18. If somebody had an accident on their 17th birthday, the day before their 18th birthday, they're still legally deemed a child. And for people who are under 18, we have to work in what is seen as in loco parentis. We have to act as a reasonably prudent parent would act. Again, these are legal terms, and it's quite hard to work out what a reasonably prudent parent would do. You're often better to act on the side of caution. It's what's interesting is I taught lead climbing on like kids courses, like kid performance climbing courses, and we often get the parents to sign to say that they're happy with their kids leading, but you could easily argue in those cases that, you know, is that parent giving informed consent? And it's one of these things of like, you know, often you see people and they talk about wanting to have a disclaimer. I had a client who was a lawyer, and one of his clients was somebody that owned a super yacht. And on that super yacht, he had a friend who he'd get to teach diving, but he didn't have any qualifications. So the guy that owned the super yacht wanted to know if there was any country in the world where a disclaimer had been upheld, so that if there was an accident, then his friend would be covered. And that guy did his research, like, and there wasn't a country where if you'd signed a disclaimer, it had been upheld regardless of what had happened. And this is where we're getting into sort of the technical legal ground. Similarly, as well as children, we've got like a complete novice requires a greater duty of care than an expert. We'll look into a case study in a bit that shows that. How we judge that level of expertise needs to be refined, so that, you know, in that case, in the mountain training, they're talking about, there's talk about how do we judge these people that are coming on these courses where we have to get them to climb a certain grade. You know, how do you judge people? And actually there's when I did that thing I put on my Discord about, are you ready to teach, is a student ready to lead, there's a lot of it's never cut and dry. We can ask questions, but if you've ever watched House, Everybody Lies, I jokingly say that in my experience, some more men would tell me the hardest grade they've ever climbed, whereas more women would describe the grade they're comfortable at. There are, you know, I think maybe when people get a little bit older, men get a little bit older, they're a little bit more conservative, and, you know, there are going to be outliers, and I don't want to say this is what men do, that's what women do. That's just just me looking at things that I've experienced. The key thing is, you know, can we observe their skill levels in a safe setting before we put them into a more dangerous one? So, you know, if we're teaching leading, have we put them on a top rope on something at their grade so you can see actually how they climb before you put them on a lead? And if you do put them on a lead, can we put them on something a lot easier and actually look at the processes of leading rather than, you know, throwing them against a killer face? So this one is, you know, how do people sue you? There is certain things. So you have to show that you owed that person a duty of care. So if somebody has been injured and, you know, it's nothing to do with you, then, you know, do you owe them a duty of care? The second thing is that, you know, having shown that that person, you know, owed you a duty of care because they've taken money off you, and this I think would be interesting for people that are what I would call Instagram guides. You know, they go out in the hill and then they take people out, and it's like, well, you are acting as an instructor, you might not be qualified. You then have to show that the instructor was negligent. And often this is where it gets technical, in that I would have, if somebody thought I was negligent, they would take me to court. They would get a technical expert who would say, well, actually, this is why he was negligent. Mark should have been doing that. And I would get my technical expert who would say, actually, it's a lot more grey than cut and white. And, it's like the battle of who's the most believable and, evidential. Negligence would therefore show there was a breach in that duty of care. And then most people that are suing, it's a civil case. And there is a lesser burden of proof in a civil case if it's like a criminal case. So in the case of the Lime Bay managing director who was taken to court for corporate manslaughter, there is a higher burden of proof in a criminal case than a civil case. There are various defences. The one that most people rely on is called the Valenti non-fitting juror, which is roughly translate to a willing volunteer cannot sue. So there was a famous case, Cuthbertson versus Pope. Pope had been trained to climb by Cuthbertson, who was a guide, over a period of time. The judge deemed that as he had been shown how to climb and had a higher understanding of the judgment needed to accept that risk, that actually he had made an informed consent by going on to lead that climb. Cuthbertson had provided him with all the instruction to do that, and it was an appropriate route. And essentially, I think in this case, it didn't go through because the Valenti cause stood up. Pope had been seen as willingly putting himself on lead. And it's one of the reasons that when I teach leading, if I'm doing it with 2 or more people, I will sit down and have a conversation in front of everyone, so everyone witnesses this conversation about the risks that people are about to undertake by lead climbing, and we explain that, I've taught you this and this and this, and actually you're now aware that if you fall off, then it can result in serious injury or death, and that actually by tying in, you are accepting that risk. If you don't wish to accept that risk, do not tie into the rope for lead climbing. But yeah, one of the reasons I sit down with the group and do that is witnesses. Effectively, witnesses. There was another thing which some people used to suggest that it's called a cessation of cause. So if somebody breaks their leg or injures themselves some way, and then another thing happens and they can't go on to do something, and it's the actual injury that does it, then because you only broke their leg, then there is a cessation of cause. This is not really that. I think this has been challenged successfully on numerous occasions. I heard this story off a lawyer friend of mine. Police arrested and injured somebody, and that didn't really, there was no problem with that. That person then got injured again and ended up in a coma because the original injury meant that when they were injured again, there was I think they got a brain infection because the blood-brain barrier was broken. And they successfully prosecuted the police because in the arrest that happened before the actual second injury, it was deemed that that the police were responsible to a certain degree because if the second incident had happened without the first injury, they wouldn't be in a coma. So how can we show we are not negligent? So we can use proper procedures. We can check our students' ability, and that's not just by talking, that's by seeing. We need to choose appropriate venues and activities. One of the things that the mountain training talked about was that bus stop incident. There literally is only 2 routes that you can that are vaguely suitable, and that actually means there's only one. And on the, I get asked about um, training. Do I have to climb VS in the rain? And the answer is no, you do not. Um, However, because of the choice of venue, it kind of then meant that that was the only option. So that's another issue of that thing. So that's, sometimes there's peer pressure. So if you've got, a bunch of rope guns and one person that's lesser, they might feel coerced into doing the route. The other thing is using equipment appropriately. So, not going out of thing. More and more important nowadays is PPE inspections being up to date. So there's been a change in the law whereby basically you need to have PPE inspections. Again, I think this will be something that bigger organisations might be better at than smaller ones. In that PPE inspection, you basically every single wire, carabiner, sling should have a unique identifier, and you have to do that. So when I was down south, we went through an entire storeroom of hundreds of carabiners, hundreds of slings, hundreds of harnesses, and we have to inspect them individually once a year. And so, it's again, it means that I think there's going to be, this is a hidden cost of business, if you like, now. Keeping up with good practice. So again, looking at these incidents that the mountain training and other people report on, and ask, am I using good practice? Have I got thorough risk assessments and guidance? Have I got decent paperwork? Do I know about common accidents and incidents? Am I appropriately trained to do what you're doing, or experienced? So I think having or not having a qualification is not a defence against negligence. The Health and Safety Executive recommends 4 pathways to competency. One is a recognised qualification. So that would be, in terms of climbing, that would be a national governing body qualification from mountain training. You might have got an equivalent qualification from the American Mountain Guide Association or some other country, and that might be seen as an equivalent qualification. You may work for an outdoor centre where they've trained you up specifically to use their abseil tower or their indoor wall or a specific venue in a specific way. And that's another way. And the final way is, actually your experience. And you've got to think that actually, just because you're an experienced climber doesn't necessarily mean you're going to, or a hill walker doesn't necessarily mean you'll have the relative experience to make the right judgments in leading people. I see it a lot where people come into, when they're starting off, they often what people think the job is about isn't what the job is about, and actually it's not as, as exciting as they think, because actually you've got to step back and you've got to introduce people at a steady rate. And the final one is insurance, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding with insurance. There's absolutely no reason for you to be insured. If you own your own home and you operate in any way as a guide, I would definitely consider it as essential, unless you want to lose your house. The moral side of it is, by having insurance, if you injure somebody and you are negligent in some way, would you want that person to have the opportunity to be compensated for their loss? Like, you've put you know, we could potentially put somebody in a wheelchair or worse, and to give them recourse to kind of live out their life in dignity in that case, having insurance, I think, is a thing that you should see as a moral obligation or an ethical one. The one of the areas I think that people get into a bit of a kind of don't really know is what types of insurance they need. Now, if I am just giving out advice on here and I'm not charging, arguably because I'm a BMC member, I think I'm a BMC member, I'm covered by their third party liability. I'm not, you know, I'm just giving advice. Um, if I was away on holiday and I injured myself and I want somebody to pay for my hospital bills and my repatriation, you want to get travel and activity insurance. There are different ones. So you often hear people going the BMC membership, which is, you go, it's hospital bills and rescue costs and repatriation. Whereas if you go, you know, you can get really cheap deals through the Austrian Alpine Club, but that is rescue costs and hospital bills, I think, and it doesn't cover repatriation costs, which could be considerable. Then there's like self-employment insurance. So I'm self-employed. I don't have self-employment insurance. So if I was to have an accident and be unable to work, I've got that. There's nothing, you know, I would have to maybe sign sort of like if I'm disabled, I could maybe get a disability allowance, but essentially I have got no, there's no way for me to, you know, if I was working for myself, I can't sue myself. Um, you then get like what they call vicarious liability. So, like this weekend, I was working for Plessy Brennan and I use sort of their vicarious liability in that I'm working for a bigger organization. People would often prefer to take that larger organization to court rather than me, the individual. There might be some situation where that organization then decided to try and take me to court um, to recoup some of the loss, but at least the person that was originally injured is covered. And the last one is the one that I have when I'm working, and it's called professional indemnity insurance. And there are lots of different ways. And effectively, what that says is that when I'm being paid for work, if an incident happens and I'm taken to court for negligence, that professional indemnity insurance will cover the costs up to, I think it was like £3 to £5 million. I can't remember what the actual thing was for the BMC, but yeah, it's I think, and that's kind of the end of it. And so hopefully, what you've what we've learned through this is that there's, you know, various different incidents that have had various different impacts on our industry and trying to mitigate against them, you know, history repeating itself. um, we we can learn from those mistakes and become better at what we do, and how actually there is, you know, a moral obligation to be insured maybe, and that depending on the organizations you're with, whether you're a big organization or a small organization, maybe think about how you know, your risk assessments, your guidance notes and stuff like that, and how you get people to um, you know, say that they've read and agreed to your policies. It's an interesting thing. Yeah, and that was just today. But yes, like to thank Mountain Training for sending me that stuff. I really do recommend looking through the learning through lot and this safety report. Um, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see what they say about these things. And hope you have a good afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day. I always struggle to